Hi everyone, and welcome to my audiobook. I am Jeffrey Seelman, and I will be teaching you how to protect yourselves from all things negative emotional energies, and how to protect your home, how to protect your business, how to get in touch with your spirit guides, and much more as well. And we're going to start this book with something about me, some history. I'm basically creating a how-to book, something you can learn from. So by listening to this audiobook, you're going to learn many things. And so I won't spend a lot of time talking about myself, but I do think that it's fair that you get a background history of who I am, what I do, and how I came to do it. And so this is part one, all about Jeffrey Seelman. I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, September 29th, 1959. And as I'm writing this book, I'm 53 years old. It's the year 2013. Things were very different in my life from the very beginning. I My first memories were of being able to not only feel a lot of emotional energies around me, but also I saw these luminescent beings, which I later determined were spirits. I wasn't quite sure what they were when I first saw them. I was very, very young and consequently had issues in school. You'll find this to be a very honest book and something that is written from my heart, something that is written directly for you to learn. I'm a teacher by nature, as well as an exorcist and clearing expert, and I want you to learn from this. And my first experience really was something very strange. I was 4 years old, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I saw two lights. I thought they were giant eyes at the foot of my bed. I was 4 years old. I was very young. It was very dark in my room, and it was also very late at night. And I couldn't quite make out what was going on. So I sat up in bed very startled, and the two eyes separated, moving in different directions. Only a half of a foot or so, but enough to let me know as my eyes began to get used to uh, what was happening in front of me, that these were not eyes, but that they were some kind of lights. And so what I saw as my eyes became adjusted to the dark was two small beings standing at the foot of my bed, probably not much taller than me at the time. Maybe 4 feet tall or whatever, and they were wearing some kind of either uniforms or robes. And they had some kind of chains around their necks, and they were wearing these things on the outside of their uniforms or robes. And attached to the chains were these large lights that were self-illuminating. They were giving off their own light. They were not shining brightly in my face. It was not like a flashlight type of thing. It was more like a light that was meant for some purpose. I don't know if they used them to see with, or if they were used for some other purpose. I seemed to startle them, the two of them. Both of them were wearing the same outfits, and both of them were wearing the same chain and large light. The light was probably about 8 or 9 inches in diameter, quite large, really. Kind of a bluish tint to the light, not really white, but kind of blue. And uh, it was really quite frightening. I would like to tell you that I was very comfortable and all of that, but I was not. I was very young and I was very frightened. And so the first thing I did was kind of scream out and uh, run out of the room and run to my mom's room and let her know what was going on, run to my parents' room. The impressions that I got at the time were that they were not there to harm me, and that years later I really had wondered, whether or not I was meant to wake up and see them. That they didn't seem to make any noise. I just seemed to know that they were there. I've always been a light sleeper my whole life and was back then as well. This being about 1963, 1964, I believe 1964. And I'd always wondered whether or not that I was meant to wake up and to realize that I was being watched or worked on, most likely without my knowledge. It was something that always was with me. My mother never let me forget it, and talked about it until the day she died in 2001. She'd remind me of the time that I came running in her room. By the time we got back to my room, they were gone. How they got in the house, I don't know. How they got out, I do not know. And not long after that, I had another experience. I woke up in the middle of the night and I felt that something was downstairs in the basement. And we lived in a ranch style house at the time, so it was only one floor and then a basement. And so I got up in the middle of the night and I walked to the basement door that opened up, and we had sort of a family room downstairs as well, so everything was carpeted. I never really got a chance to go downstairs. I opened up the door, and at the bottom of the stairs, holding onto the railing and looking up at me, was what I had at the time called an electric man, something my mother also never let me forget. I was very specific about the whole thing. But that it looked sort of like a luminescent human being, glowing. And I couldn't see through it, but it was definitely not human. It was not a person standing there, but some kind of either spirit or alien. It did not look like the two beings in the room. It did not seem to have any kind of uniform on. It was just glowing. And it was looking up at me. And of course, being 4 years old, I simply let out a big scream and once again ran into my mother and father's room. And by the time they got me settled down and back to the basement and checked it out, there was nothing there. But I always knew that there was something there. It was quite clear to me. I was very awake and I was not asleep. I was always a light sleeper. Uh, as we moved after that into another suburb of Milwaukee, and I was very sensitive to the emotional energy in the classrooms that I was in nursery school and kindergarten. Consequently, I had a very difficult time remaining in these indoor classrooms. I was very sensitive to emotional energies. I felt these things, emotional energies, radiating off of other people, and teachers, and it seemed to already be in the classroom, that it was, along the walls and along the ceiling. And so I just felt everything. And even stranger that I could see these sort of luminescent, transparent beings around some of my classmates. And they were not still. They were moving around a little bit, kind of walking to and fro in the classroom, and seemed to pay attention to individual students. I did report these things to my teachers, as well as my parents, with some very negative results. And they just didn't like what they were hearing. And so I didn't have such a great time. Also, I had problems with colors. I later found out when I joined the Air Force that I was partially colorblind. I see colors very well. I just don't see the same colors as other people. Anybody who has partial color blindness knows that we see bright colors very well, but they look like different colors to us. And I had issues with red and green, other things, and so I failed every color test that that was put to me. Teachers were very angry. They didn't understand color blindness back in the early 1960s, and so my teachers thought I was simply doing this on purpose. And I wasn't. I simply could not grasp the colors that they were presenting to me and put them to the correct label. And at the same time, of course, I was seeing luminescent beings in the classroom and at home, and I thought everybody were seeing these things. I didn't know that it was not natural. I was also very hyperactive, and of course we had nap time during school. We had to lay down on these mats and at least pretend to sleep for a while. That didn't work for me. I was very hyperactive, and so that didn't go well as either with the teachers. So I had issues in my early years of school. Things did not really go that well, and I was, not making friends, and just did not do well. And so I learned early on, as I was coming into first grade, grade school, second grade, as I was coming into these grades, that it was better if I kept my mouth shut, because I simply was not making any friends, and was, had very negative reactions from my teachers. They weren't afraid of me. I wasn't predicting the future or anything like that so much as just seeing things that other people were not seeing. And so I learned early on, if I just didn't talk about these things, because evidently everybody else was not seeing what I was seeing, that I could have some kind of normal life at that age. And so that's exactly what I did. I stopped talking about it. I stopped talking about it at home, for the most part, and I definitely stopped talking about it at school. And so I developed really strong friendships. And it was really, things got better for me because I stopped talking about what I saw and the things that were seeing me. One of the things that I noticed about this was that when I looked around the classroom, that I noticed that some of these transparent, luminescent beings had noticed that I could see them and would sometimes look at me. Sometimes with curiosity, never with fear, but sometimes a little bit of anger, almost, as if they did not want me to see them. It was just a percentage. Some were fine and just simply went about. It seemed that they were there to either help my classmates in some way that I could not grasp at the time. And sometimes it seemed like some of them were there almost to antagonize their feelings. Most seem to be pretty nice, and some seem to be not so nice. And so it was a very interesting time for me. And so, but the psychic ability, which it turned out to be, was always there. And even though I was trying to shut it off to the best of my abilities, I never was really able to. And so I really kind of used it for my own purposes. So what does a young schoolboy in the 1960s use it for, but for his own purposes? And that was that I seemed to always know when trouble was coming. That was one of my abilities at the time. So if I was doing something I wasn't supposed to be doing, and as a young boy, that was quite often. I was into mischief quite a bit. That I always seemed to get a feeling when an authority figure would come around. I'd get this 30-second warning. So I knew that somebody was coming, even though I couldn't see them. I could feel them. And so consequently, I rarely got caught doing anything. Being so sensitive led to all sorts of problems when I was growing up. No matter how hard I tried, I could really feel. I went to schools that were very old. Actually, my parents had gone to the same schools. And so they had a history to them. Meaning, of course, that because, as I later learned, that people generate emotional energies, these emotional energies accumulate in the atmosphere. And they did accumulate in the atmosphere of the classrooms I was in. And so I felt very claustrophobic when I was inside. When I was outside, I was fine. And I felt very differently. Once in a while when the weather was nice, and growing up in Wisconsin, that wasn't very often. When school was in session, during the school year, once in a while the teachers would take us outside. Besides recess, when I was fine also, they'd take us outside and they'd hold class outside. Not very often. But I noticed that all of these feelings went away. And I would do much better. I'd raise my hand and talk and be fine. When I was inside of the classroom, I was not fine. And I really felt this huge amount of emotional energy not only being generated by my classmates, who were very nice, most of them anyway, and the teachers, who were very nice, most of them anyway. Emotional energy being generated by my classmates that seemed to really affect me. And also emotional energy that seemed to be in the classrooms themselves, because once in a while I'd find myself in a classroom alone. Sometimes I had detention. I got in trouble. And if I was in a classroom by myself, I still felt all of this emotional energy that was there. And so I knew that it wasn't just people I was reacting to, but some kind of feelings that were left over in the classrooms. And I had the same feelings at home as well. And during this time, I did have some premonitions. I did have some visions of some things that would happen in the future. My parents became quite concerned about that and actually had me tested, somewhere around 1966 or so, somewhere in there. So I had to spend the night in a hospital with electrodes all over my head, and they told me to go to sleep, which I did not. Was not able to, as if some 6 or 7-year-old boy was going to be able to sleep with electrodes all over his head and in a hospital while being monitored. Not a chance. I really didn't sleep very well until I was 35. You know, much less when I was, 6, 7 years old. And so uh, I never really heard anything about that till I was actually an adult, where my mom told me, that they determined that I was hyper aware, as they called it, aware of every little thing that was happening around me. And I don't know how much they really knew about psychic ability, and I certainly didn't know anything about it, but that was sort of their term for it, being hyper aware and being sensitive, ultra sensitive to things that were happening around me. I lucked out when I went into junior high school, 7th and 8th grade. It was a new building that had just been built, and I was there for the second year of its operation. And it was actually very interestingly designed. It was round, completely round, and so even though I was very sensitive to individuals around me, trying so hard not to be, that I really found that the classrooms themselves seemed to be much easier on me on an emotional level. Why? Of course, because they simply didn't have a history to them. Emotional energy had not built up over the not only years but decades of the schools that I'd been to before that were very old. Nice schools, but they were very old. And so here was a new school, and I just did better. I did better academically. I did better emotionally. Did better with friends. I did better in sports. And so after 7th and 8th grade, of course, on to high school. And right back to an old school that actually both my parents had gone to high school there. Both my parents had gone to high school there in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and actually a suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, right outside of Milwaukee, in Shorewood, Wisconsin. A very, very nice school, but I was right back into being in an environment that was decades and decades old. And once again, I really felt all of the emotional energy that was in the classrooms, and it really had an effect upon me once again. I just didn't do well. And I tended to gravitate toward social events and after school stuff and parties on weekends, and was involved in a ski club thanks to my parents. So I did really well outside of school and not really well in school, where I had to sit in a certain desk, and I was very much attuned to all of the emotional energies that were happening around me, not just from my current classmates, but from years and decades of other people being there and releasing their emotional energy into these classrooms. I didn't at that time really know what was going on. I just know that I didn't like it. I wasn't comfortable. And those of you out there who have psychic ability, and I think everybody does have some psychic ability, and we'll talk about that later in this book. Probably, maybe you have some idea what I'm talking about. That feeling of sort of a claustrophobic feeling of too much emotional energy, of being able to pick up the feelings, the thoughts, the words that were coming from people around me, classmates, and also the emotional energy that had been left over maybe from the days of when my parents went to the same school. And so I didn't do all that well in high school. I liked it as far as I liked history, the social studies. I seemed to like it on an academic level, but I was so uncomfortable in the classrooms that I simply sat in the back of the class, kept my mouth shut, and it was difficult for me to really concentrate. I did little tricks as well, that I was very much into technology my whole life. I was hooking up all sorts of colored lights when I was really young, and from scratch, batteries, wires. In an early age, I went on to hooking up kits, diodes, systems of alarm systems, where basically that I used them when I was really young, so I knew when my parents were coming, they didn't want me to watch television past a certain time, so I basically went to a local electronics shop and I got essentially early remote controls that were on wires back then, so I could turn off the television at 30 feet, and I had a 30-foot cord where I could stick it in my little earphone, and I designed actually by using a kit and diode by diode. I was 7, 8 years old at the time. Essentially, an alarm system, so that when somebody would come down the hall towards my bedroom, and I had my own bedroom, that a little alarm thing would go off, real silent, real low frequency that only I could hear, and I'd have everything under the blanket with me so that I could switch off the television immediately. So my parents swore they'd hear me watching television late at night, and then they'd come out of their room, which was right across the hall, by the way, and open the door, and the room was dark. I know I must have given them some grief, confounded them quite a bit when I was growing up with all of that, but I was very much into technology and very much into lights. I seemed to be very comfortable around colored lights, and went to a great deal of trouble to put these things together from scratch by use of batteries, as I mentioned, and wires, lights, and made little boards with colored lights on them. Some were white, some were not. Very, very much into technology and very much into communication. I was able to talk my parents into putting a big directional antenna on top of our house long before cable came around. With the understanding that if they would use the directional antenna, that they would get a much better signal for their television downstairs. And they said, that's a great idea, because the picture wasn't coming in so great. Even though we lived right near the city, we were so close to the television antennas at the time. They were all grouped together in our city. If you're so close to them, you actually don't get the best reception. So I talked my father, who is also very much into technology, into essentially getting a directional antenna, and they were so happy about it that they hooked it up to my television upstairs in my room. And so all I had to do was go downstairs and do the dial, turn the dial, and the directional antenna would move around. Now, I had an ulterior motive for this. What I did was I had written different cities. We lived right along Lake Michigan in Milwaukee. And so I'd written different cities across the lake, different cities in Illinois, Chicago, and Madison, Wisconsin, which is out west from Milwaukee, the capital of Wisconsin. I had written all these cities. I had written their newspapers and asked them if they would send me the television section. And most of them did. It was just something they probably were not used to getting from a young kid. And so I would study these television schedules. And one of the things that was interesting was we lived very close to the timeline, which was in the middle of Lake Michigan, and so shows that were on at one time would be on at a different time. And so I would study these things and move the antenna and point it towards these different cities in order to get television stations that were very far away so I could watch my favorite programs that were like Lost in Space and other shows that were happening that were science fiction, especially. I was very much into science fiction, as probably shocks most of you. And so I was able to watch all these different shows at different times because I knew when they were on, I knew what city they were in. No, it was not a perfect picture, but it was good enough to watch. My parents had no idea what I was doing, and they got the benefit of actually getting a better signal downstairs in the family room. But of course, in the middle of the night, I'd go downstairs and I'd change the direction of the antenna and I'd point it towards a faraway city and be able to pick up places that were hundreds and hundreds of miles away. We had a pretty high roof, and the antenna went pretty high and would move around and point towards these cities, even across the lake. And I would, depending on the weather and the clouds, as anybody knows who studies radio and television transmission, signals would essentially bounce off the atmosphere, bounce off the clouds, and I would get all these different things. And the reason I'm talking about this was I had a big interest in technology when I was growing up, when other children around me just did not. And it was not something I really shared with my classmates. It was just something I was into on a personal level. And when the wonderful show Star Trek came about, and Lost in Space and all of these things, I was very much into that, and I put together all sorts of phasers and replicas of the Starship Enterprise. And when I was called upon to write stories, for essays for school, starting in grade school, everything was about outer space. My travels in outer space. And I remember, kind of catching a little bit of grief from a teacher because every report that I wrote, every essay, every homework assignment, I wrote an insignia of a make-believe television station that I designed. It was Channel 61, and which did not exist at that time. UHF was just coming into play, and essentially that I designed my own television station with my own list of television programming, most of it being either cartoons or science fiction programming. I think Star Trek and The Twilight Zone was on at least 8 times a day. So it was kind of like my fantasy television station, and I would sign all of my homework assignments. At the top, I had a little insignia that I made for my television station, and that would be at the top of every single homework assignment that I turned in. Teachers, they probably thought it was kind of cute in a way, but they really didn't want me to do that, but I kept on doing it anyway. I just had to. It was very important to me. And I've always been a strong individualist, and so definitely a curiosity to my teachers. When I was in high school, I went to high school from 1974 to 1978 to give you a good time reference. Very interesting decade. People talk a lot about how the 70s were very boring, but I just don't see it that way. I think they were very exciting. A very exciting time after the very violent 1960s. The Vietnam War was coming to an end, and things were beginning to change a lot here in the United States and around the world as well. And so how I used my psychic abilities when I was in high school was in a very different way. Because I always knew when authority figures were coming, when trouble was coming, I was able to get away with a lot of things and also warn other people. And so, as young people do, I never got into smoking cigarettes, but certainly my classmates did. And so we'd go outside between classes and smoke cigarettes. Occasionally, I would indulge in a little bit of marijuana. I'm a very honest person, so I will, you know, I'll tell it like it is, and so there some of the times that went on outside of the school between classes, and I always knew I would get this 30-second warning before a teacher, the principal, or the police come driving by, because high school is on a pretty busy street, that I knew when they were coming. At first, my high school classmates did not listen to me, and of course they all got busted. Soon, they got to realize, I don't think they really knew why, we didn't really talk about psychic ability or anything, that, you know what, listen to Jeffrey. Jeffrey knows, he knows when he says it's time to run, it's time to run. And so, and it was every time, this little warning system that I had never failed. Never failed me. So, we'd be outside doing something, between classes, whether I was involved or not, or just out there, and I'd say, hey, it's time to go. Sooner than later, people understood, Jeffrey's running, it's time to go. So I was kind of being used, as sort of a warning device, and it didn't bother me, it was good. These are my friends, my comrades from high school, and that's sort of how I used my abilities at the time. That's how I understood them. I really had tried to close up to the best of my abilities the other stuff, seeing of spirits. It had such a negative effect upon people around me when I would talk about it. I wanted friends like anybody, any normal teenager. So skip the spirits and let's see if I can help out my classmates by letting them know that trouble was coming. Wherever I happened to be, some kind of warning that something was going on. In 1976, which was my sophomore year in high school, a father's friend had a really good idea. He was an artist, and he said, he said to me and my friend, you guys should really learn some meditation or something, because you're all too hyper and you need to learn some way to relax. And I was very much into progressive rock at the time. Yes was my favorite band, and still is, by the way, still is. And I still attend Yes concerts and listen to them all the time. Very much into the Pink Floyd, progressive rock, Genesis stuff. Just love it. And I love classic rock as well. We'll talk later in this book about that. Some of that does relate to psychic ability, but in a lot of ways. But I thought it was a really good idea because I was into this really, spacey music concept. My father had a wonderful sound system. He was, I think I got some of this from him, an interest in that, because he had preamps, post-amps, reverberation amplifiers, everything you can imagine, giant speakers. He was really into sound and his own kind of music. He liked modern music and very old stuff as well. A collector. And so my mom had really good taste in music as well, and they both liked the Beatles and a lot of things that were happening back in the 60s. And so in 1976, at the suggestion of a friend's father, we went over to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and at night they had an introductory course in transcendental meditation. So my friend and I went. It was a 2-night thing, a couple hours each night, 2 nights in a row, and we listened to them. We both seemed to like what we heard. I didn't find the explanations to be all that scientific, but I thought that what they were trying to say about consciousness, kind of settling down and having a positive effect upon the body, a restful alertness, was something I might be able to use. Because I was very hyperactive. And I thought, wow, why not try some meditation? It's not affiliated with any religion, clearly. And they weren't trying to indoctrinate me in any way. I could tell that. They were simply talking about some loose scientific concepts of relaxation. And so I ended up taking the course, which was very inexpensive at the time for a high school student. My father drove me over there, and I went to see this teacher, and one Saturday morning in 1976, I was 16 years old, and it worked right away. Right away, first time. I was amazed. And it was kind of a interesting thing, because I'm very honest, with my clients and like to use my own personal stories, even if it makes me look kind of bad or human, any way you want to look at it, that my father and I, right before the night I was supposed to go do this meditation, for some reason we just had one of these father and son nights, and we ended up getting kind of drunk. It was a little bit different back then. The law was 18 in the United States, or at least the state that I was in. It was not such a big deal, and parents could legally give their children alcohol, so please don't blame my now deceased father. Okay, we just had some beers, and the next morning I woke up and I wasn't feeling so hot. But I decided to go and do this meditation anyway, and I did this meditation. I learned how to do it from this instructor. And when I was finished, it didn't take long, when I was finished, my hangover was gone. My hangover was completely gone. I felt great. And I told my father so on the way back to the car. I said, Dad, I really feel great. And I knew right then and there on the way back to the car that I would be doing meditation for the rest of my life. And I'm not trying to promote any particular kind of meditation. You'll probably know from my website and my talks on radio and television that I don't do that. Find your own way, find your own meditation. I just know it works for me. Transcendental meditation is what I learned in 1976. And I knew on the way back to the car that I would be doing that twice a day for the rest of my life. And here I am at age 53 doing that twice a day. And I can tell you that I didn't join any religions. I have not remained in contact with people from TM or anything, and they didn't try to contact me or anything. It was no indoctrination or anything like that, or mind control. It simply settles my mind down, which naturally races. And so many of my clients have talked about that is during our sessions, oh, my mind races, and what do I do, and I always suggest some meditation. I don't always suggest transcendental meditation. I'm not trying to promote any particular style of meditation, but the idea I think is pretty good of learning some natural way to focus and settle the mind down. And of course, there are so many different ways to do it, but it's a very wonderful thing. So after high school, I joined the United States Air Force, and it was really the wrong thing to do. There was nothing wrong with the United States Air Force. It's a great organization. I scored very high on my tests, and it was between the Navy, United States Navy, and United States Air Force. They both wanted me, and I decided to go into the Air Force just because basic training was easier. I didn't want to crawl in the mud too much. I had to do some of that stuff anyway, and we had to learn how to shoot M16s and obstacle courses and eat some sea rations. But other than that, it wasn't too bad. So, and the Air Force treated me very well. But it was the wrong thing to do, because I learned something, that I was not particularly good at following orders. If they made sense to me and I completely understood them, then great. But of course, as you know in the military, that sometimes you get orders and you have to follow them without question. that is perfectly normal for the military, but that was not really right for me. And looking back, I'd wish that I had waited a few years and really had sort of sown my wild oats and really found out who I was as a person before I really had joined, because I didn't do so well in the military and actually left early, even though I got an honorable discharge. That I didn't really do so well, and now I know why. I just wasn't really ready. I was a little too young and needed to really discover who I was. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot of self-discipline in the service. And when people do talk about it and they say, "Hey, I'm going into the service," I say, you know what? It's not a bad idea, because you do learn self-discipline. And I was very, very fairly treated, and the food was good. And anybody who knows me knows that I do like good food, and the food was very adequate, and they did not starve me. So kudos to the United States Air Force for that. I did try to learn what I could from it while I was in that. After I got out, I was a cook in the Air Force, and after I got out, I went to work for different restaurants cooking, and I ran into trouble. I seemed to really not really be happy. I was afraid of hot grease. You really can't be a cook if you're afraid of hot grease. And I was afraid of knives, essentially. That I seemed to have a fear of cutting myself, of using different kinds of meat and cheese cutters and things like that. So I was not really doing that well. And so I was kind of in and out of different restaurants and all of that. It was just really kind of a soul-searching and career-searching time during the 1980s for me, during my 20s. I was now in my 20s. So I was bored and kind of unhappy and really not involved in any particular relationship with any one girl. I was just kind of bouncing to and fro. And so what I would do, but I had an interest in metaphysical things. I got kind of back into some things I had let go for a long time. And so I would go to university libraries, not actually being a part of the universities, but actually I was able to, at that time, access the university libraries. I didn't have to pretend that I was going to the university. You simply were able to access the libraries. And I started studying metaphysical concepts. And this is something that was very important. So I spent a lot of time when I was not working studying metaphysical concepts. I studied spirit communication. I studied various religions, the history of religions. I studied the concept of good and bad spirits. Philosophy it was to me, and nothing more. I didn't look at it as anything but that. And so for 10 years, essentially, almost 10 years, I studied spirits. I gravitated towards ancient books. I tried to get a hold of stuff in the reference section of these libraries, translations into English, which is the only language that I speak, unfortunately, but that books were written a long time ago on the subject of spirits and communications and the philosophies of these different spiritual groups and religions, all religions I was studying. And I did it to help myself because I was feeling very lost. And I felt that I needed to really get a hold of who I am and who I wanted to be. And it was kind of interesting because even at a very young age, I would go to churches and not the same church. And my family at the time were not going to churches, but I would go. My brother would also go, and we'd hit these different churches. I usually get into arguments with with the teachers, the Sunday school teachers, over technical aspects of the religion that I didn't believe in. I kind of grasped the concept. I believed in life after death because I could see spirits. So I felt there was something going on. But then, of course, they got into the fine print. Do this. This doesn't exist. This is wrong. This is right. And this I didn't agree with, and of course I would ask questions, and in most major religions, one of the rules is you don't ask questions. You just go along with whatever the book says, and I couldn't do that, and so I kind of bounced from religion to religion, but it fit in very well with my individual studies in my 20s at university libraries. It fit in very well because now I was studying all sorts of different religions and concepts, leaving what didn't fit, what seemed to be unbelievable or not believable, and things that did seem to make sense to me, that seemed to feel right. And so I went on with that for 10 years. And something very unusual happened to me. I was 27 years old. I was in a university library, and I was reading something, and I was fully awake, fully awake. And all of a sudden, I was somewhere else. I was looking down and driving down a road. And then it was like I could not control what I was seeing. Like somebody was making me see these things. And my vision turned around and it looked at this face that was driving this truck. It was a truck, a very high ceiling truck, old truck. And it didn't look anything like me at all. But I looked at the person's eyes who were driving, and I said, "That's me. That's me." I could just tell by looking at the eyes. I was so close. My vision was right up against this person's face, and I thought, "Wow, that's me." And I was right there. So I was kind of in two places at once. I was sitting in the university library, and at the same time I was in this truck with this person driving down the road who did not see me. And all of a sudden I kind of hear this loud bang, and it was like I was inside of this person all of a sudden, and I seemed to hit my head on something and go flying out of this truck and rolling down this road. Rolling down this road, and then I stopped. And I realized that I was in midair. I mean, I seemed to be above ground about 15 feet. And I look down and I see this body lying in the middle of the road. And some ways away from that, I see this truck and the engine is smoking and some rock. It had hit an outcropping of rock along the road. And I realized what had happened. It's kind of interesting when you have an experience where you remember a death from a past life, which I evidently was having, and I kind of knew instinctively what was going on. I had rolled right out of my body. And the first thing that I remember was that I felt exactly the same. I felt fine. I did not feel like Jeffrey Seelman. I actually felt like this person, that I was inside of this person's mind and body, and I looked down at my body lying in the road, and I knew that I was dead. I knew that I had rolled out of my body and I was dead. And yet I felt completely alive. My personality was the same. I felt no distress. I didn't see any lights. I didn't see any beacons. Everything looked very clear to me. The road, the body lying in the road, the truck, all of that was very clear to me. And it was really quite profound. I thought, wow, well, I feel fine and I feel exactly the same. I feel no pain, but I am dead. And just as soon as I had that feeling of being okay and well-being, but also knowing that I'm dead, I was back in the university library. And I was like, wow, I didn't do anything to make that happen. There was no regression involved. I had never had anything like that done. I was not dozing off. I was not on any kind of substance. I was wide awake. And yet, someone or something deep inside of me made me have this experience. And I thought, well, now I know what it's like to die. Later on, I would, you know, realize that forces that were far more powerful than me wanted me to know what it was like to die, to remember what it was like to die so that I could help my clients in the future, as I do now. And as I went along, because as I write this book, I had my business for 22 years, how many times I've had to repeat that particular story of people were afraid to die, who were going to die. I work with people in hospices and or people who have had loved ones pass on um, recently, and all the different people who have asked me these questions, that I related that story to them and said, well, this is, from my perspective, this is what it is like to die. Not much happens. One minute you're in your body and the next minute you're not, but your personality and your emotions and all of those things remain. And I realized as time went on that the reason that these forces, spirit guides, whatever you want to call them, wanted me to have this experience 5 years before I started my business, and I had no idea I was going to get involved in this kind of work, that I would be able to help people. That story greatly helped a lot of my clients. And they said, oh, wow, so that's what it's like. From my perspective, to be able to help people to share that story as I'm sharing this story with you now. And something I've done on the radio and television as well. And even in print. Articles, newspaper articles and print, magazines for people who wish to know my perspective on what it is like. And so I was fine with that, and so I went on studying, and it was real interesting. When I was 30 years old, 3 years later, I actually met a girl who I really liked and developed my first serious relationship with. And she happened to be very metaphysical. She was a professional psychic. It still is one, and a very good one. Better than very good. And I didn't get away with much. I can tell you, she knew a lot, and I had a business at the time, but was still working a day job at the time. And so she was really into Star Trek, and so was I, and that's kind of how we got together. It was not really the metaphysical thing, it was more of an interest in that. And one night she invited me to a Ouija board session. Now, with all my interest in all of these subjects, I was still frightened. I thought really about not going. And even half an hour before the session started, I really thought, you know what, maybe I should not go. I don't know if I really want to talk to any spirits, even if this is real, that, what's going to happen? I had the normal fears that people do. Should I do this? And I decided at the last minute that I should go. But I would not really participate. And fortunately, I didn't have to. It was actually kind of crowded. They had a big round table, 2 people operating the planchette, which is the device that rolls over the Ouija board. And they'd evidently been doing this for years and years and years. Lots of people were taking notes. And I was sitting sort of in this outer ring of about maybe, 6 or 7 people. So I was not even at the table. I was actually sitting, not touching anybody, outside of this table behind these chairs that were around the table. And so I just simply watched, and I thought, it's kind of interesting. They are taking this very seriously. And it was not the least bit spooky. These people were all professional people. Had various jobs. Some were school teachers, some were artists, and my girlfriend at the time, who I really was just getting to know, was an executive secretary. Very normal people, but they took this very seriously. And the Ouija board, the questions they were asking whomever, were very serious questions. and not frivolous at all. And at the end of the session, I thought it was time to get up and go. They, turned towards the outer ring and eventually towards me and said, "Okay, Jeff, do you have any questions for the spirits?" And I said, uh, "Do you have any messages for me?" Simple as that. And so, of course, the planchette goes around, and spells out some stuff, and they wrote it all down. And the message was to stop eating so much sugar. And my jaw just dropped. Now, I had not known these people, and I'd only known this woman, for a week or two. Nobody knew my business. And what nobody had known was that very day I had been at a routine doctor's appointment, and my girlfriend didn't know that. None of these people knew that. I did not discuss it with them. And it was very routine. And the doctor said, "You know what? You're in great condition. Just stop eating so much sugar." And so I was like, I knew there's no way they could have known this. I wasn't touching anybody. I wasn't touching the Ouija board. I wasn't even near it. I wasn't even near the table, really. I was sitting pretty far back. Really as far back as I could get. There was no way they could have known that. Did it make me an instant believer? No, but I mean, I really realized I was onto something. It was word for word from what the doctor said to me. Exact words. And I knew that some force or something deep inside of someone or somewhere was trying to send me a message to listen. That's what I took from that, to listen. And I did. They said, "Any more questions?" And I said, "Well, do you have any more messages?" And a message came through supposedly from my deceased grandmother saying, to pay attention, you're doing great, I love you, and to stick with it, and all of that. They didn't even know that my grandmother had died. I mean, as far as, and so I just came away with it with this concept that, maybe I should pay attention to some of these things a little bit more. I wasn't freaked out. I wasn't frightened. I wasn't one of these people that just believes anything really easy. Although it's pretty clear to me that something unusual was going on. And I ended up attending more of these sessions as I got to know this woman. We went out actually for 6 years. And eventually I got involved even with the Ouija board and planchette and had wonderful experiences. And what happened, because now we're getting into exactly how I started my business. Through the next 2 years, at some of these sessions, I learned that one of the people who had been doing sessions for years was having a problem in their home. And they had tried, all of them had tried really hard to get rid of this feeling that they thought was a spirit. And so one of the messages that came over the Ouija board was, "Hey, why don't you let Jeffrey give it a try?" And I thought, me? I mean, yeah, I studied all of this stuff, but I had never actually put any of it to use. I don't know what I'm going to do. But I said, okay. So, sometime in the next week after that session, we went over to this guy's apartment. And I simply tried to move some energy, essentially. I'd always been very sensitive to energy, and so I kind of put up my hands and kind of pushed with all my might to get rid of whatever was in there. I did feel that there was something in there, and I did feel some huge amount of emotional energy in this guy's apartment. And I heard back from this guy, who was a very sane person. He was a writer, and not the least bit given to fancy and make-believe and said, you know what, after all these years, it's gone. You came in there and did whatever you did, and it's gone. And all these other people who have, been doing this stuff for years were unable to get rid of this. And you came in and got rid of it. That led to me trying to solve another issue of another person who was friends with some of these people who were having a problem in her house. And so I went over there and pretty much did the same thing, and lo and behold, the problem disappeared. And so I thought it was time that I really kind of get to know my own spirit guides. I thought, well, the Ouija board's kind of interesting, but maybe it's time I kind of get a little deeper into this on a personal level. And so I did. One of the questions at a Ouija board session, same group of people, I asked was, how do I get in touch with my spirit guides? And they said, I live very close to Lake Michigan. And they said, Jeffrey, go to the Lake Michigan. There are some very smooth bluffs. They're not cliffs. They're just, very nice. And sit down on a park bench, and we'll come to you. And I went there a couple times and nothing happened. Bright sunny days. And the third time I went there, something astounding happened. I was looking up at the sky, and there were some clouds up there. It was partly cloudy, very beautiful, and the clouds started shimmering silver. Clearly shimmering silver. And at the same time, I felt this wind blow over me. It was not coming from the lake. It was some other kind of wind. It was actually quite a still day. And it was a different kind of wind that I'd ever felt before. It went right through the center of me. And it was like I could read the minds of what was coming from this shimmering silverness in the sky. And I felt this incredible sense of freedom. It was like these warriors and men and women, like spirits, that were sending me this energy that they were showing me through feeling that they were out to set people free. And they were very powerful. And I remember saying out loud, this went on, for 5 or 10 minutes. I was just sitting there amazed at this feeling I was getting. These feelings. And I remember saying out loud to nobody, because there was nobody around, so that's what you do. You make people free. You spread freedom. I didn't get an answer back. I just knew it. I said, who's ever up there, and I felt there was more than one sending me energy, that these, whoever they were in the business of helping people. And it was an amazing feeling. And it was a bright day. It was not a graveyard. It was not a spooky situation. It was a bright, beautiful day along Lake Michigan. And my spirit guides had made contact with me in a very powerful way. And I thought to myself, I'd like to get involved in that, because if you can set people free, their minds, their hearts, the chains of negativity and negative thinking and all the negative things that happen to us in our lives. Because I felt really good after this was over. I was like, wow, I feel really different. I said, I really want to be a part of this. And I decided to put an ad in a small local newspaper. And along with this professional psychic, my girlfriend, we both did this. We kind of decided to do it together. She was great she did psychic readings for a living as well as her daytime job, and was very accurate, and we kind of started together in our business. We called it Vanguard Psychic Investigations, and that's how it remained for 7 years until 1999. So this is 1992. And I put a small ad in a newspaper, and it was weird because I took we had one car, my girlfriend took it to work, and I took a bus down to this small local newspaper in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And as I was approaching on the bus, the downtown area, all of a sudden I felt like I was on fire. It was the strangest feeling I've ever had in my life, even stranger than what happened at the lakefront. I felt like I was on fire, and I had this feeling like I was doing something so important, like I was going to meet the president or something. All I was going to do is drop off this little 5-word ad that I had made and $15 and leave this little tiny office. I knew what I had to do as far as I knew what the procedure was. I'd called up. And yet, I felt like I was about to meet the President of the United States, which would, make anybody feel special and kind of nervous or excited. I felt that it was indescribable. I still to this day can't describe what a feeling I had. I felt so energized that I felt like there were flames coming out of me. I felt I was about to do something really, really important. And yet I was only going to put this 5-word advertisement in the newspaper, of which, by the way, I got no response from. It was just a week, it was a week ad. And I went in there. I still felt the same. I gave the lady the money and this little box and the 5 words in the box, and the whole thing took about a minute, and I was out the door. And I was walking down the street towards a bus stop, and as I was walking down, I had the feeling that I had done something incredibly important. Like, it was like, wow, the feeling you kind of get when you win the lottery almost. I mean, it was like, I can't believe it. And the feeling dissipated as I waited for the bus, and I got on the bus, the feeling went away. But I thought, wow, was that weird? What was that about? It turned out to be just one of many things that would happen as I went along in my early work and in my business, and still happens today. Things that were initiated clearly by spirits, my spirit guides, and a message to me that what I was doing was very important, because I got no business out of that. Nobody called. But I went and I did it again. And again and again. And it wasn't expensive, but and eventually I started to get some phone calls and started to do work. And I started to write. And the newspaper took an interest in us, that actually we put the ad in, thanks mostly to my girlfriend, who actually knew somebody there. Be honest about that, that they were interested in what we were doing, and we ended up getting like a 3-page article out of that. It was so weird. And first time I was ever photographed, for a newspaper for this work. And I started writing, and I tried to get my concepts about spirits. I was, essentially only trying to help people who had negative spirits in their home. I was not really into the concept of negative emotional energy yet, but I did find as I was working that people had a lot of negative emotional energy, just like my school years. I felt it in their homes. And when I was doing this kind of work with my hands and shooting out this energy, this negative emotional energy, because I could feel it, I could also feel when it was gone. And I want to say that again so you understand that. Because I could feel negative emotional energy or excess emotional energies, I also knew when it was gone. And that's one of the ways that I work. So that's one of the ways I was successful at clearing. And also because I was able to see spirits that I knew when they were gone too. And so I would do writing, and that led to my first appearance on a national television show, which was Sightings, which also I did with my partner at the time, this girl, and it was very exciting to have a Hollywood crew come out and actually do a filming and of 3 women, essentially, if you know the story, back in 94 or so, 95, that felt they were being watched. 3 young women who felt they were being watched, all professional women, completely sane, who felt a presence in their townhome. And so Sightings calls up, and us and also the women separately, and can we put this thing together? And the women said, no, we need Jeffrey to come out right now, and we can't wait because somebody's watching us take a shower, and I wake up with an impression on my bed like somebody's been sleeping next to me. We're scared. We're not going to wait several days. We wouldn't mind being filmed if you want to film it, but we're not, So Sightings decided to put them in a hotel for several days to keep them safe. We were not allowed to have any contact, Mary and I. Mary was her name, excellent psychic. And Mary Ellen, to be exact, for those of you who wish to look her up. She's still available and very talented. And so I'd never met these women, but I talked to them once, and then Sightings split us up so we couldn't talk to make everything very legitimate. They were very concerned with everything being legitimate. And we went out there, and it was a very hot day, and they had to close the windows. It was midsummer in order for the camera crew to get the proper sound. I started sweating. Not so much just because I was nervous, and I was nervous, okay? But the idea is that it was so hot that I just started to sweat. And so it was so interesting. And so I did... Mary actually located, the central point of the problem in the place before I did. She was very good at finding out where these things were, and I was good at getting rid of them. And so that's kind of how we worked as a team. She would really kind of pinpoint some of these problems pretty quickly, and then I would do my thing and get rid of them and get rid of the problem. And that's what I did here. And of course the girls called up and said, you know what, the problem's gone after you did that. And also they filmed for Sightings at a time when I was not there. It was essentially almost 12 hours of filming during this whole process, and then Sightings filmed them later on to get their take on what had happened after I'd left and had the problem returned, and it had not. As a matter of fact, the girls called me up, and they were in their early 20s, women, a year later, and said that the problem had never returned after I did the clearing. And so that was great to see myself on television. I was so excited, wow, on such a big show as that as well. I really couldn't sleep that night when I first saw it, and I was so happy, to see such a positive result of my work. And that led to other shows, did another national show or two, and also going on to local radio stations in the morning, especially the morning shows that they have and still do, and essentially clearing out studios and doing clearings on disc jockeys and all of that, some of whom would laugh in my face. And I'd, here comes the Exorcist, and all of that, and none of them would be laughing when I left. And I don't mean to say that in a derogatory way. I know it's a very controversial thing that I do. And this all happened really in the 1990s and coming into the late 1990s and early 2000s, that they just didn't know what to make of me. And so, of course, disc jockey is always trying to entertain their audience, and they should. Essentially would, crack jokes and all the rest of it. It didn't make me nervous because by that time, I really was more confident in what I was doing. In 1999, when Caller ID came out, I changed my name to StarClair. Mary had left. We'd actually, broken up as relationships do, and she went her way and did psychic clearing successfully and still does, and I went on my way and into my work. I branched out into negative emotional energy as well. The reason I changed the name of my business was that when Caller ID came out, there was only a certain amount of letters that you could spell out on a Caller ID machine. So actually it came out Vanguard Psych. People thought I was calling from a psychiatric hospital or something, or some kind of hospital, and sometimes would not answer their phone. And so I had to come up with a name, and I did so in a night. It kind of came to me as I was kind of going through some names by myself. A name came to me, StarClear. I've always loved outer space, and clearing was what I was doing, and I was working. I had found that people would call me that they had sometimes more than one problem, or sometimes there was not a spirit involved, but excess and negative emotional energies that people had generated from living in that home for years. Former occupants, long before the present occupants had moved in, that they simply there was a huge buildup, an accumulation of emotional energy, and so that was a problem I had to deal with, because I knew that one of the things that was attracting negative spirits, which are essentially negative spirits, or spirits, people who are dead, passed on, and continue to do negative things. Hence you have negative spirits. Demonic spirits essentially being the counterpart of angels. They've been around for a lot longer, they're much more powerful and more difficult to deal with. And so I branched out my business. When I created StarClear in 1999, I was creating my website, which was kind of new at the time, the internet and websites and all of that. And I wanted to, let people know that I was also available to clear out negative emotional energy, and not just negative spirits, which is less common than the very, very common negative emotional energies from the past. Because many people have lived probably in your home. If your home is 40 or 50 years old, and you and your family have lived there for 5 years, or your apartment, or your condominium, whatever, that there's been a lot of people sleeping in the same bedroom as you. Not at the same time, but they've released emotional energy into your environment, and that can cause problems. Sleep issues, depression. They may have been depressed many years ago. Negative emotional energy builds up. It accumulates in our homes and our businesses. We'll go into that later in the book, and all that, and what to do about it. And also in our body's personal energy fields. And so I was doing clearings on individuals, and on families, and on pets, and in homes and businesses. And I called it StarClear. And that was formed in 1999, when I went from doing straight exorcisms into also clearing people's homes, because I was able to reach a great many more people. And that was very important to me, to be able to help people that just didn't have negative spirits in their home, but also had these problems of not feeling well in their environment. Landlords would call me. I can't rent this place. It looks right, but it doesn't feel right. I can feel something weird in here, and so can the people who look at the apartment or the home, that it doesn't feel right. The atmosphere feels kind of thick. A good signal that there is emotional energy in the home. Because we've all had experiences of going into some kind of home, shop, store, restaurant, something, and the place doesn't feel right. And what we're picking up on is emotional energy. And so I went along doing that, going into radio stations and clearing, and then people's homes and clearing. And I was in the yellow pages, and was really just doing in-person work, and for years and years and years. And doing radio station shows and some TV and news shows, stories mostly around the Halloween time, when it came to some of this, which I found kind of interesting, considering my clients would call me all year round, but the news media would pay attention to my business mostly around Halloween, as if these things only happened around Halloween. They do not. They happen all year round. And so, but that's when people pay attention to horror movies and Exorcist and all this kind of thing. And so I want to tell you something, that happened to me that was very profound as I was going along, that really had an effect upon me. As I was in my business, right before I changed my name to StarClear, I was, getting better and better at doing what I do. And I was in my apartment one day alone, and I was sitting up reading something non-metaphysical. I was completely wide awake. And all of a sudden, I was again someplace else, just like that incident happened where I was in that truck. This time I saw a guy sort of in a short grassy type skirt with long dark hair and also very dark skin, um, standing on top of a hill. And all of a sudden I was right there in front of him, and he could see me. And I thought he probably was, maybe from Mexico or something or whatever, just from the way he looked from a long time ago. And it was like I was not controlling any of this. I was almost like a passive observer. And before I knew it, I sort of hopped on his back, and yet I was still in my apartment. And he made some kind of insignia, symbol in the air, and we were flying through some kind of what some people might call a wormhole, or some kind of some kind of transportation thing that was happening. No devices, but just he was moving and I was moving with him, and we were within a few seconds we were in some kind of village, and there were people with bright swords walking around, and they were killing people. And I kind of yelled out, like, "Oh, let's get out of here." And he kind of looked around, looked at me, and kind of made sort of a shush noise, like, "Be quiet." And he was just intently studying this. This only lasted for a couple of minutes. And then I sort of hopped on his back again. I didn't seem to have a choice. I didn't know what I was to do. It was just something that I seemed to be made to do. Part of my consciousness, part of my astral body. Of course, I knew I was probably really back in my apartment, but my entire mind was here with this happening. And we went right back through this, some kind of wormhole or something. There were all these bright lights shining and all of this happening. And then we were back on the hill. And then a moment later, I was back in my apartment. I had not moved. I was still sitting up against the wall. At that time, my bed was on the floor behind this couch. I had sort of a studio apartment, and I had not moved. But I had the funniest feeling. I was in two places at once. Unlike the first time, where essentially I had fully come back, now I was still on the other side, so to speak, and also in my apartment. A very, very uncomfortable feeling, I can tell you. I'd like to say that it was a great feeling being in two places at once, but it was not. And it really shook me up. I was really hoping it would go away. It did not. And it went on and on. And 3 days later, I actually contacted my old girlfriend and talked to her, and I told her what had happened, and she said, "Your psychic abilities are increasing, Jeff. It's something that can happen." I said, "Do you understand that I'm in two places at once now? I'm on this side and I'm on the other side. I'm in the non-physical world and I'm in this world at the same time, and I can't shake it." And something you should know, listening to this audiobook, is that that feeling never went away. It took me years to get used to it. Years. But it was a rough several weeks, because I was in two places at once and the feeling never went away. Yes, it helped me with my business. Yes, it helped me with my psychic abilities. They greatly increased at that very moment. But it was a very uncomfortable feeling. And it's just something I never forgot, and I do speak about occasionally, but not quite as often. So things kind of went on, and now we're into 2004, and I'm working on my business, StarClear, trying to get my concepts out by writing and working, doing in-person clearings and on people and homes and businesses. I was actually working for a couple different shops doing clearings in the back rooms, which were very nice. They had beautiful tables and crystals everywhere, and they wanted me to work for them to help their clientele, and I would make a but that's all I did. I never worked any cash registers or anything, and was never very good at that. And so something I did a this is a story that I'll tell you that I think you should hear. In 2004, a radio station in Milwaukee, Wisconsin contacted me, and they said, we're thinking about doing this contest. It's a morning show, and we're going to have a contest and to see which business has the most trouble in the Milwaukee area, and then we're going to have you go out and clear it on the radio. We're going to bring the radio people out with us, and you're going to clear it on the radio a few days later. And so I did this interview with them that actually was kind of pre-recorded, and then they had this contest on that day. And it was so interesting who won. It was actually a bakery on the south side of Milwaukee that was a gourmet bakery. Won this contest. They were having a problem, and they wanted their bakery cleared. It was in an older building on the south side of Milwaukee. And the first thing I thought, being a lover of food, I'm not really overweight or anything, and I don't have a food addiction, but I do appreciate good food. I always have. I think maybe you guys out there listening to this can maybe relate to some of this. And I thought, oh, it could have been a foundry, because I was clearing a lot of those kind of places as well. But I said, okay, so I got to do this radio show next week, and so I get to go to a gourmet bakery. I said, that's not the worst thing in the world. So I thought, gee, I lucked out here. At least I get to go to a nice place. And so I go to this on the day of the clearing. I go, and it was so nice. This person who owned the bakery actually, this was 2004, actually had taken our pictures off the internet. Not only the disc jockeys, but my picture off my website, and had actually put that on separate cakes, had made cakes for us with our pictures on them. I had never seen anything like that and didn't even know it could be done. And I was like, oh, I was so, it was like, wow, thank you so much. It's so nice. And I did the clearing, and on the radio, and it was successful. It was, the place felt much better. It didn't have any negative spirits in it. It just needed a good clearing. It was a very old building, and he felt that, it just needed a clearing. And so, just as the clearing was coming to an end, it happened to be like a lunar eclipse, which I know nothing about. I don't know much about astrology or numerology. I believe in these things, that everything affects everything else, but I decided to do a few things right in place of doing a lot of things wrong. And so I sort of specialized in my studies. And so I heard the radio announcer say, they had people back in the studio and also people at the bakery. And they said, after the commercial, we're going to talk with Jeffrey about what a lunar eclipse means and what today's lunar eclipse means. Or tonight's, actually. Because this is early in the morning, and so it's going to happen this nighttime at night. And I thought to myself, oh no. Not only did I not know that it was going to be a lunar eclipse that night, but that I know nothing about lunar eclipses, and I can't speak on them, and boy, am I in trouble. I know lots about exorcism and clearings, but I didn't even know it was a lunar eclipse, and I don't even know what that means, and what am I going to say? Well, I lucked out. They ran out of time. The 2 hours were up, and of the show, the morning show, a very popular morning show in Milwaukee, and they never got a chance to ask me the question. And I thought, oh, boy, that's good. That's good. So that night, I brought the cake back to my apartment, and at that time was actually sort of a lower part of a duplex. So actually, I was seeing clients at it was kind of a shop at a big picture window, and I was seeing clients there, and it's 2004, so I had moved from place to place and was now seeing clients at my home and doing individual personal clearings. And so I had a piece of cake, and it was fine earlier, and hopefully the radio people did too. They enjoyed their cake because I actually did a radio show with them a couple years later, and they really got a kick out of it as well. Excellent cake, and so the hours rolled by. That was in the afternoon, and now it's the evening. I'm watching a little bit of television, and then I hear this voice in my head, which I knew at that time, as my psychic abilities increased, to be my spirit guides. And they said, Jeff, because of the lunar eclipse, we want you to go outside. Just step outside of your apartment. It was sort of a step down into the lower thing, a few steps down. Step up into the night air and reaffirm your commitment to your work. And I did so. I didn't think, a lot about it. I thought it was a good idea, that I just did a nice radio show and I got a nice, cake. It was very, very nice, very thoughtful. And I went out and I did, I said silently, that, this is my life's work. I really enjoy helping people. And I'm going to continue to do this for the rest of my life. And I meant it. I mean everything that I say. And so it just took a minute or two, and I went back down into my apartment, my lower flat or lower unit, half of a house. And I sat down, I was watching a little television, and about 20 minutes later, something picked me up and held me in midair. Nothing like this had ever happened before. And I was terrified. This is 2004. The same day I did this radio show, and there was a lunar eclipse evidently happening that night, which I don't know what that means exactly on a metaphysical level. I still really don't. But I was held in my living room in midair, about maybe a foot off the ground. I was just held there. And all of a sudden I felt this wind rushing from my back through me, through the front, and all the doors and windows were closed. No fans were going. It was a incredible rush of wind. And at the same time, I felt somebody pushing something into my back. At the same time, I looked to the right of me and I could barely move my head. I was just frozen, like deliberately frozen. And I looked over to my right, and there was this huge old book that was floating in midair next to me, and the pages were turning really fast, like a wind was blowing them. All I could see were all these symbols all over the pages and some kind of writing I did not recognize. The pages were turning very fast. At the same time that was happening, I felt somebody or heard somebody in my mind speaking, but they were speaking so quickly I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I thought that it related to the book. And at the same time, I felt somebody pushing something into my back, and like this information from the book was being essentially downloaded into me. And I started to sweat profusely, being held in midair. I was completely sober, I was on nothing, I was completely awake, and I'm a very practical, sensible person. But I was terrified. I didn't know if I was dying or what was going on, but I saw the pages of this huge book turning next to me, but I could barely turn my head, so I could hardly make it out. And I felt something being pushed into my back, this huge wind rush over me, and somebody speaking in my head, a male voice speaking, which seemed to me for some reason to be something from this book. And the pages were turning really fast, and the book looked to be several thousand pages long. It was just huge. And this went on. 10 minutes later, I'm still hanging in midair, and I'm thinking, am I dying? I was sweating profusely, and I couldn't turn around to see who was pushing something into my back. And then I thought, back in the 1990s, I was so panicked I couldn't even think straight. And this information seemed to be piling into me and almost going past my consciousness deep into some place, into some kind of file or something deep inside of me. For those of you involved in technology, it's like putting a file for later use. And I thought, I used to do these experiments where I would turn my mind around in a 360-degree angle in order to see what was behind me. It was something I was practicing doing in the 90s. And I thought, after 10 minutes of this, I thought, I got to see what is behind me. But I couldn't move my body. And so I kind of turned my consciousness around to look what was behind me. And what I saw was this. I saw a hand that was glowing with long fingers and a robe that was attached to the hand and part of an arm pushing what looked to me like some kind of round CD or DVD disc into my back, slowly pushing it into my back. And I thought at the time, it occurred to me that this was some kind of symbolism. I was very much into technology, and I thought, okay, they're probably not putting a DVD or CD into me, but they want me to understand that they are simply downloading information into me. Because I was very much into computers too. And my background also was in technology. I'd worked, at an internet company before that, and a communications company, and so it was something that I could understand. But I very, very clearly saw that. And at the same time, I was sweating profusely. It was just dripping off of me. My clothes were already wet, and I was terrified. The book was turning pages faster and faster. The voice was speaking faster and faster. And I thought, wow, am I dying? Is this what's going on here? I don't know what's going on. But, and all of a sudden, after this 15 minutes had passed now, 15 minutes of this, and I screamed out, I had enough. I've had enough. Out loud. And everything stopped and I fell. And I fell on the ground. Kind of hard. Thank God I had carpeting on the floor. Because I hit the floor. And I was just sweating profusely. I could barely get up. I was shaking. And I went into my office. I had a 2-bedroom flat, essentially. And one was a bedroom, and I made one into an office with computers and all of that. And that's where I designed my website and talked to my clients and all sorts of things. And in the front room where I was at is where I saw my clients. I had 4 couches in a couch pit way, and one was on the side for clients, and three for a couch pit and 1 for clients. And that's where this had happened. I went into my office, and I sat down, and I put on CNN on the computer. The front page only. And I never changed it. I never read any articles. I just sat there breathing hard and going, well, either I'm dying or that was something very metaphysical. I'll probably know within half an hour, because one of the two is going to happen. Either I'm going to deteriorate or I'm probably going to come out of this somehow. It was very, very hard on my body and my mind. And within about 20 minutes or so, or 25 minutes, I had stopped sweating, and all of a sudden I realized that I felt better than I'd ever felt before. I felt great. I felt energized and completely healthy and completely normal, and yet I only retained some of this knowledge. I felt like this whatever they'd put into me was there for later use. It was like, yeah, I know some of it. All of a sudden I seemed to know a lot more about exorcism. I get that, but I felt that it was all deeply buried inside of me, and that I would use it as I needed it. That was a feeling that I had. And I was very happy because I realized that it was something metaphysical, and I thought, oh, you guys and girls, you spirit guys, it's like, wow, you sure know how to surprise somebody. No warning there. I had no warning, like those times before. No warning whatsoever. And so I actually had a very difficult exorcism the next morning. I was on a person and I aced it. It was seemed to be extremely easy and very successful. And so it was like one of those wow moments that happened to me. 2004, I was approached by my spirit guides, whom I seemed to be, my psychic abilities had increased greatly, who basically, said to me through telepathy, do you want to join this organization? Do you want to be a part of us? We want you to think about it for 3 days before you give us your answer, because you can't get out of it. It'll be for the rest of your life. After your life is over, if you want to, then this contract will dissolve. But do you want to help people? Do you want to be a part of us and be connected with us? Think about it. We can't offer you, they said, anything. I heard this in my mind, and I even saw the Spirit talking to me. We can't offer you anything. We cannot offer you a reward for this work. It has to be out of the goodness of your own heart. So you won't get a reward when you get to the other side, and someday when you die, there's no reward. Either you do this to help other people, or just say no. You have 3 days to think about it. And I did think about it. I wasn't so quick. I didn't know what I was joining. And I did think about it. And 3 days later, the same Spirit came back and said, have you made your decision? I said, I have. I've decided to become a part of your group. Because I think not only can I help, but I think you can help me help others. And I don't need a reward. Helping other people is a great reward. I can't think of anything that's made me happier in my work so far than seeing a family come back together, and seeing a house that was in disarray and the whole family being afraid, no longer being afraid of their own home, clearing a business that was not doing well and now they are doing well, seeing an individual that was suffering greatly and now is feeling better than ever. Those are my rewards. I don't need any reward. Those are my rewards. And what happened next was also very profound. I kind of went through this ritual thing where they had me repeat some words, affect sort of an oath to help other people, and to join this group essentially of very powerful spirits on the other side. There was sort of like an order of exorcists. And it was the same group, I noticed. The same feeling of that one day when I was at the lakefront and I saw those shimmering clouds. I realized it was the same group. That they just decided, they gave me the choice. Do you want to join us? And if so, it would have to be that for you to do this work for the rest of your life. And I made that choice to do this work for the rest of my life. However long that might be. To help other people in need. And one of the things I got from it was very profound. I went through this ritual and it was very quick actually, and nothing really crazy metaphysical happened during it, but I did see them and I saw a whole bunch of spirits in front of me. It was very interesting, but one of the things that I've gotten from the media and also from people, is that why don't you charge more? Why do you just charge, maybe smaller amounts of money? And I remember in little bits and pieces of doing this in past lives, this very same work that I do, and how I would work for people of great power, and how maybe I was taken advantage of. And I thought to myself, in this work, in this life, that I want to be able to reach everybody. That I don't want to just be able to reach people of a certain economic stature. So I work for people who don't have any money. Sometimes I work for free. I work for people who hardly have any money at all. And so I charge smaller amounts of money because I want to reach more people. I felt this was right for StarClear. I felt this was right for me in this lifetime. That I am able to reach everyone, because not everybody has a lot of money. And so if somebody calls me and if you take a look at my website, I don't charge all the great deal of money, And the concept is that I want to be able to be a psychic, an exorcist, a teacher for everyone, and to be able to reach everybody. And that's who I am in this life. Somebody who wants to help other people. I get a great deal of satisfaction out of helping other people. If you notice on my website, I don't have a page that is a testimonial page. People ask me about that all the time. Why don't you do that? I'd be happy to write you that. I've helped thousands of people in the last 22 years, this being 2013. And that all clients are confidential. It's on every page of my website. That I help people and I don't talk about it on the radio or on television or in print. I don't give out names. I don't want their names. I want it to remain secret because it could ruin people. I help people who are famous. I help people that are not famous. I help people that have important jobs in the communities around the world, and I help people that have just regular jobs or no jobs at all. But knowing that they worked with me or worked with a psychic, an exorcist, could actually do their business harm or their reputations harm, and that is something I don't want to do, even if it would make me more famous or bring my work up or being known quicker than I am. And so it's very important to me that I let people know that you are confidential. Everything you say to me, I don't record people's conversations. I don't write things down. I do that deliberately for their security, for my client's security, not for my security, for my client's security, so they can feel comfortable coming to me and knowing that I'm not going to ever take advantage of them and reveal that I worked for them and that I helped them, whatever business it is, whatever person it is, whatever they do for a living. They can come to me, they can come to me in privacy, and that I won't use that to further my own ends. It's very important to me. So that's just a little bit about me. There's always more. There's always more. And but this is the first part of this audio book. Something about me, Jeffrey Seelman, how it all began. That I was born with psychic abilities, and strange things have happened to me in my life. Things that didn't happen to other people. And there are people. You should know that people have approached me about writing a book before. I'm doing an audio book because I felt I want you to hear my voice. I want you to hear it straight from me. I speak better than I write. And other people who have wanted to write for me had started to write this book. And then, because it's going to be a how-to book, and they thought, after listening to the strange things that have happened to me in my life, very supernatural things, they wanted to turn the book into a story about me. And I said to them, no. And very often they had already started the book, professional writers. And I said, no, it's going to be a how-to book. People are going to read this book and they're going to learn something. And so yes, the first part of this is about me, and the other parts of this book will be about personal clearing and home clearing and business clearing and other things as well. I wanted to make a how-to book so that when people got this book, that they would learn something from it and say, you know what, I can use this information in my own personal life. That's what I wanted to do. It's not about Jeffrey Seelman. It's about the work that I do and how that you can help yourself and become stronger and protect you and protect your family and make your business stronger and business better, and how you can increase your personal experiences and make your life better. A how-to book, as you'll see as this book goes on. And I realized that I couldn't do this in writing. That I'm a teacher by nature. I've been doing more and more teaching as I go along in life, and that I tend to repeat myself being a teacher. Maybe teachers who listen to this book can relate to that. And it doesn't work well on print, Because when people have written, or some of the things that I have written before, or when I've done audio lessons, some of people have come to me, not the clients, they love it, but the idea that professional writers and say, you know what, you repeat yourself sometimes. And I said, yeah, I'm a teacher. I need to get my concepts across so that people understand it. My clients are people who have listened to my audio lessons or read the things that I've even written, said, you know what, that's a great method because now I really get it. But professional writers, they weren't really getting it. It's like, no, you can't repeat yourself. Well, so I decided to create an audiobook and do this all on my own. So as I'm writing this, or as I'm speaking this, I should say, there's nobody in the room with me here. As I'm writing this in Chicago right now, I came here to speak this book, this audio book, in September of 2013, and so it's for inspiration by Lake Michigan here, and I'm not in my home city. And so I decided to do an audio book because I think it would be able to reach more people and that people would understand me correctly and what I mean, and that I speak from the heart. And I'm not using anybody else's words, and nobody else is going to edit this out. This is simply me talking to you, and I hope you get something out of it. And so this is the end of part one, something about me, Jeffrey Seelman. And then now we're going to get into the how-to part of this book, which is what I really want.